Good morning. This is December 23rd, and we want to take stock of the year and see what one can say about the past year and what might one possibly be able to say about the following year. And it has been an awful year for an awful lot of people. And let me just review where we've been. First, we have seen more or less the disintegration of not only the post-World War II system, but the post-Cold War system. Everything has frayed in one fashion or another. The US role has changed in the world. The world has changed. Many countries have changed. And we have ongoing disasters of a serious magnitude. And by disasters, I mean, amongst other things, for human beings who live in countries that are in total disarray and or who have been killed. So let me once again start with Europe. Europe is under strain in the same way, in some senses, as the US is under strain. That is to say, people are unhappy, or at least a proportion of people are unhappy, and they blame the previous governments. What is causing this unhappiness? Well, many things. COVID and post-COVID economic downturns, immigration of one kind or another, and conflicts which consume people's attention, the resources of the societies, and which are not easily managed. The French government is in disarray. The German government is in disarray. Various other governments are on the edge of disarray in Europe. And of course, there's the war in the Ukraine. Russia is attacking the Ukraine, as we know. We don't need to rehearse that. And Russia has also been weakened. And Russia is not in the same economic, or for that matter, military circumstance that it was when we began the year. They have spent a lot of their treasure on the war in the Ukraine. They have lost a lot of their military. They are now, among other things, using North Koreans to help them in the war in the Ukraine. They certainly have gotten the rest of Europe scared, because they have threatened that they will move beyond the Ukraine. And Russia has also been weakened internationally in other parts of the world. The demise of some of its power and authority in Africa, and in recent months, its reduction of influence even in the Middle East, where its ally in Syria has now disintegrated, and the groups that it was supporting, namely Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran indirectly, are all either in difficulty or maybe even at the end of their tether. So not only has European and American influence been rattled, but Russian influence has been rattled. The only major country that so far has come out fairly cleanly is China, certainly with respect to Europe, but it too is suffering economic downturns and has to make adjustments. So that is Europe. Then you move to the Middle East. The Middle East has fundamentally changed in the last year. Hamas is close to defeat, and the population of Gaza has been both badly decimated in terms of death, ill health. 70% of the habitable houses have been destroyed by Israel in response to the attack at the beginning in October. And so Hamas has been weakened, and we are now told that some kind of compromise or solution and some kind of liberation of the remaining hostages may be in sight, perhaps when you listen to this. But that means, in English translation, that Israel will sooner or later reoccupy Gaza. And the situation in the West Bank has badly deteriorated while we were focused on Gaza. And so, for all practical purposes, the promise of a Palestinian solution seems to have faded at the moment. No one can imagine how Humpty Dumpty can be put together in the near term, even if Middle East and other countries are arguing that the Palestinians, there must be a two-state solution, and the Palestinians must be given a state. I think even the Palestinians don't anticipate that this is going to happen very, very soon. And it may very well be that whatever compromises Israel makes will not include a very near or middle term future for the Palestinians. So that problem has gotten worse. Then, as we all know from recent times, Hezbollah has more or less been defeated. Hezbollah was supported again by the Iranians and to some extent the Russians. But Lebanon has also had huge amounts of damage, and the political future of Lebanon looks very uncertain, more uncertain when we started this year. Then there's the downfall of the Assad regime in Syria. No one anticipated that this was going to happen this year. It is a monumental mess. It is unclear whether or not the current leadership in the capital in Damascus can manage to figure out a way to rule their own country. And it looks very much like Turkey and to some extent Israel will contribute to making that very difficult, if not impossible. So what the future of Syria may be is unclear. In the meantime, Israel has moved in and has taken not only more of the territory that was meant to be neutral between it and Syria, but it in fact has moved into Syrian territory beyond that, as well as having bombed multiple sites all over Syria. Meanwhile, there is a Kurdish section of Syria that Turkey has some interest in, and so Turkey has also moved into that area. So the temporary government in Damascus may have to deal both with Turkey and Israel, and they may not be able to if they want to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. So it is a huge mess. But what has happened is that the countries aligned with Iran, the Shiite countries, have more or less disintegrated, been defeated. The one country that is standing is Yemen, and Yemen is using its military capacity, also provided again by Iran and Russia, in order to continue to bomb Israel to some extent, or to try to bomb Israel or send missiles. And probably Iran has told them to go ahead and do as much damage as you possibly can, because in a sense, Yemen is the last country standing that was part of this alliance that went from Iran through Syria, through Yemen, through Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then with some annexation with the events of Hamas. So the whole structure of the Middle East has changed. And insofar as one can say at the moment that may change, it's that the Shiite countries have, in a sense, lost their leverage in the area, and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are now pretty much in the driver's seat in that part of the world. But, almost everything I'm saying may have changed fairly drastically by the time you listen to this. But that is not to say that serious change has not taken place. Now, I want to spend a minute on Iran, because Iran not only has been damaged through the attacks of Israel on Iran in many ways, but has also been undermined through its own economic difficulties and disarray, although some of these two things might be slightly connected. So, for example, as we speak, many Iranians have neither light nor electricity, even though Iran is a major oil and gas producing country. But the deterioration of its facility, and conceivably some of these facilities were damaged by the Israelis, means that at the moment, not only is Iran in a kind of a losing position in the Middle East, but is also in dire economic circumstances at home, and the people of Iran are seriously suffering. This may create an opening for people to help Iran. And one of the ways, of course, that the opening might also be taken advantage of is, ironically, by the Trump administration. Because if you will recall, the Trump administration nixed and disintegrated the agreement that Iran would not develop nuclear arms capacity. And at this particular moment, Iran needs help. And it may very well be that the very man, Trump, who created this nuclear mess, namely the treaty which kept Iran from developing nuclear weapons capacity, may be the very President Trump who will now go to Iran and saying, hey, we can have a new treaty if you don't develop nuclear capacity and go back under the umbrella of not developing it and have the International Atomic Energy Agency supervise you, then we might actually be able to help you in some ways. So there's a huge irony that Iran, in a sense, is a big loser in all of this, and its abilities and control in the region, which looked at the beginning of this year, looked very strong and very scary, have come unraveled during this year. How the Middle East will get itself sorted out, and to what extent the Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia can now exercise some leverage is unclear. They certainly will try. And then, it will not be helpful that the United States, which after all has military bases in the region, even for that matter, even in Syria, will it sort itself out? And will the Trump idea of none of this is in our interest, we're going to be more isolationist, will that make things worse? That really isn't clear. And the U.S. has always had some kind of difficult relationships, which are not easily improved, with Turkey. And Turkey's role has been enhanced by the downfall of Syria. So there's a shuffling of the decks, and almost anything I can say, it's unclear what this will all look like. A month from now. What is clear is that Israel is sticking, or Netanyahu is sticking to his guns and saying, anybody who makes any difficulty for us, we'll bomb the hell out of them. And also, a two-state solution is not in the offering. And also, Netanyahu will no doubt continue to have the support of Trump, who is all on the side of Israel in the events that have taken place. So Israel has had a friend in court under Biden, but will have an even greater support under Trump. Trump, of course, says that, within the first 24 hours when he comes into power, he will get this all sorted out. All I can say is good luck. And that brings me back to the Trump administration for a moment, which is that, of course, you have to make policy that is based on not only knowledge of the region, but an assessment as to what you can do. Given the potential appointments of the Trump administration in various aspects of the American government, CIA, various agencies, it is unclear how viable we will be when Trump comes into power. Let me therefore jump ahead and talk for a minute about the U.S. State Department. When a new administration comes into power, not only is the Secretary of State appointed, which, as you know, he's already been appointed, Marco Rubio from Florida, who in the various appointments that Trump is advertising looks like one of the saner people. And slightly more experienced than a lot of the people he's trying to appoint. But when a new administration comes into power, all kinds of heads of State Department divisions are also appointed. They're not Foreign Service officers very often, but appointees of the president. The person that is selecting these appointees for the Trump administration has zero knowledge or experience in foreign policy. So the person that is vetting people for these positions is in no position to knowledgeably interview people as to whether they have any knowledge, any suitability, or anything of the kind. So we're looking at a fairly scary situation in the State Department, which would be the normal agency of government, which would be dealing and advising on diplomacy in the various countries in the Middle East and elsewhere. So this transition may very well be not going smoothly through the normal channels of the U.S. government, whether it's in the Middle East or elsewhere, but maybe very rocky, where Trump himself and, his group of non-elected advisors, a multi-millionaire friend, will essentially make the decision and jam it down the throats of the State Department. Also, a fair number of fairly high officials in the State Department have already resigned or will resign because they simply can't stand what stands ahead. So what I'm painting here is that a Trump who says, oh yes, when I get to be president, I will get the Middle East sorted out, when in point of fact, there is no reason to believe that he will have the intelligence support from the CIA, from the State Department, and to do so smoothly and with, based on knowledge and support. So the Middle East has fundamentally, the decks have been shuffled in the Middle East. Exactly what's going to happen in the months ahead, we'll talk about in the month ahead. But let me assure you that almost nothing in the Middle East is the way it was a few months ago. Then you turn to the rest of the world. Asia, well, we're supposedly going to concentrate on China. The South Koreans are in political difficulty because they're trying to impeach their president. North Korea is involved with Russia in supplying arms for the Russian incursion in the Ukraine. Things don't look good there either. And so, to what extent we won't overreact in we the U.S. overreact in terms of dealing with Asia is hard to say. You have no doubt heard or read that we're going to slap a 60% tariff on the China, etc. And on the rest, for example, Canada and Mexico, it'll be like a 25% tariff. If this in fact happens, the whole economy, not just of the US, but the whole global economy will come into various states of disarray. Various manufacturers, US manufacturers who produce the t-shirts we wear and so forth, in China are already changing their production to Vietnam because Vietnam would come under the 25% rule rather than 60% tariff rule. So people in American industry as well as the Chinese are trying to adjust to beat around this bush. And whether or not Trump really makes good on these tariffs is unclear. So let us look for a moment or jump for a moment to the Western Hemisphere. The Canadian government, our closest ally, stable, Trudeau, nice, prime minister, etc., is in total disarray. He is being asked to resign. And the Canadians say, and with some knowledge, that if Trump really puts these tariffs onto Canada, the Canadian economy will unravel. Ditto Mexico. So we are in potentially, because of the tariffs that are being promised, into disarray, not only in the Middle East and in parts of East and even southern, Southeast Asian countries, but in our own hemisphere. And if matters couldn't be made worse as to how we're going to proceed, I think it was yesterday that Trump announced that he doesn't like the fees that Panama charges for ship passage in the Panama Canal. And so we're going to take back the Panama Canal. Hello, friends. There's a treaty, 1970s treaty, that gives the country of Panama total sovereignty under the canal. You can't just, nix a treaty like this unless you do it militarily. So what does Trump exactly think he's doing there? And you can imagine how countries in the Western Hemisphere are looking at all of this and saying, we had pretty good relations with the US, except for Venezuela and some other countries. And now all of a sudden the rug is getting pulled out from under us, and Trump and his friends are going unilaterally to scrabble things in the Western Hemisphere. So I think we're in a position where everybody is listening to what Trump is saying and imagining that even he does 50% of it, the world would continue to change even more than what we've seen in the last year. So if one has to trying to imagine what life will be once Trump gets in power, one can, spin all kinds of scenarios, but nothing is very clear. What's going to happen in the Middle East? Will something really be worked out and the war will be stopped in Russia? Russia is economically weakened in many ways, but be scared of countries and individuals who feel weakened because they often act even more irrationally. And finally, I want to say that the institutions that were built over the last decades, and from the end of the Second World War and beyond, like the UN special agencies, like the United Nations is more centralized, like NATO, are all under difficulties because their roles seemingly are changing. And while it's absolutely true that if Trump or anybody else says that many of these institutions need to be updated, they badly need to be updated, whether it's the World Trade Organization, which has become worthless and the US is paying no attention to, or whether it's the World Health Organization, which has a hard time coping with the various outbreaks of diseases in various parts of the world. And where reform would mean not only that they need to be able to continue what they're currently doing, but they need to reform their policies of using some of their resources to help build medical infrastructure in the various countries that they're helping. There is a huge agenda which needs to be done, or people need to do, and it's not a mystery what some of those things need to happen. In Europe, in NATO, more funds. At the very time when most European countries are in economic difficulty and they hardly want to spend more money on arms and NATO and so forth. So all the institutions which could serve as a buffer against craziness and against and could be in a position to help develop policies which will help the Middle East, which will help the Ukraine, which will deter military attacks, which will help rebuild countries, which will help development. All of that is in total up in the air in disarray. And finally, let me spend 2 minutes on climate, because above and beyond everything that I've talked about and anybody talks about, climate change is real. And climate change urgently needs to be addressed worldwide. And scientists have made much progress in terms of how to attack climate change. And many countries are moving rapidly away from oil and gas into non-polluting ways of generating energy. Many countries, including China, which is still heavily developed on coal and oil, is making huge progress in going solar and wind, etc. People are working on these things, and they require the support and encouragement of major countries like the United States. And the international institutions need to be reformed to work more effectively on climate change. And we will be soon inaugurating a president who says climate change is a hoax and he's not interested in it. So I think not only has this year been very hard and very difficult on many people in the world, not only those who are in an area of conflict, but even those who have to deal with economic adversity, which, by the way, is one of the reasons so many people in so many industrial countries, including our own, are moving to the right and are joining MAGAs and right-wing parties. People don't unravel the causality of these things and are unhappy with the cost of eggs and milk and so forth, and are therefore saying, we want a change, and the change is to the right. So people worldwide are reacting to what is happening, and that is causing political instability, undermining democracy. And when you have right-wing populists who are also going into climate denying, you're not in a very good position to either fix the problems short-term or to fix them long-term for the rest of the century. So this is a very sad and dire time in the world. Fortunately, those of us listening mostly have enough to eat, which is not true of a fair chunk of humanity, including countries like the Sudan that we're not paying any attention to, which has more famine and more loss of life than even in the Middle East. And we'll have to talk about that in the new year as well. So this is not a happy conclusion to the year, but I think what it does say is that we can't just opt out. We must engage as citizens, inform ourselves, and weighing in not only with our political structure, but also weighing in with non-governmental organizations and those that are trying to overcome the dire circumstances that are playing out in the world, and that sooner or later will also affect us. So on that negative note, I wish you the best holidays, and I will see you again in January.